Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going over players that are absolutely skyrocketing up the rankings in week number 2. Starting it off quickly with Brandon Aiyuk. Aiyuk against the Steelers had 8 catches for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, this Steelers defense was thought to be no joke, but after seeing this game against the 49ers, some people might think they're frauds, and they have good reason to. This was the best fantasy performance of Aiyuk's entire career, finishing with 32.9 PPR fantasy points, definitely winning people some weeks if they had him in their starting lineups. Now, we've seen some big performances for Aiyuk in the past, but what I want to see this year is him to claim that role as the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver, kind of take it away from Deebo Samuel a little bit. Going into week 1, we were a little bit lower on Deebo Samuel. This seemed to be a tougher matchup, but Aiyuk just said, screw that. This is the easiest matchup in my life. And the 49ers as a whole just absolutely dominated this entire game, which makes it even more impressive. Aiyuk commanded the most targets on the team with 8, and Purdy only had to throw the ball 29 total times, which means Aiyuk drew a target on more than 25% of Purdy's total passes. Now, as for things we learned in this matchup, it wasn't too much out of the ordinary for the 49ers. Samuel and Aiyuk ran the most routes out of any wide receivers, which was expected, of course. The one thing we did learn is that CMC and Elijah Mitchell, some people thought that Elijah Mitchell was going to almost split carries with CMC into this season. CMC played 58 snaps and Mitchell only played in 10. So it wasn't even close. It was nowhere near a committee. Going back to Brandon Aiyuk, I think he's a solid flex option going forward, and I'm feeling very confident about it. Number 2 on our list, we have Calvin Ridley. I think it's pretty safe to say that going forward, Ridley is back to his old self. So he was definitely worth that 3rd to 4th round fantasy pick, in my opinion, at least in week number 1, where he finished with 101 yards on 8 catches and 11 targets. Ridley ran the most routes out of anyone on the team and was targeted on nearly 33% of his routes ran, which is insane usage. Now, next week, he gets to go against the Kansas City Chiefs, and this game is supposed to be the highest scoring matchup of the entire week. Vegas has the over-under at 51.5 points, which means there's going to be a lot of passing and a lot of targets for Ridley in this one. Number 3, we have Zay Flowers. Flowers looked great in his NFL debut. All right, even though Lamar absolutely dropped a dud in fantasy performance-wise, Zay Flowers still held it down. He caught 9 passes for 78 yards and led the team with 10 targets. The next closest person in terms of targets was Odell Beckham Jr. with 3. So he had 7 more targets than the next guy up in his first ever game. That's a great sign for Flowers. Also, he was out there for 54 of 64 total snaps and finished just behind Beckham in routes ran. Now, he was clearly the best at getting separation in this matchup, which led to those 10 targets coming to him. And with the connection with him and Lamar, hopefully that grows stronger throughout the entire year, and he is going to be a great fantasy option going forward for you. Next up, we have Jordan Addison, another rookie who looked absolutely amazing in his NFL debut, even though he was going against a tough Buccaneers defense. Overall, the Vikings look stale. They look pretty bad out there, especially for a game that they were clearly supposed to win. But Addison and Jefferson were the only 2 bright spots, if you could take 2 on this team. Addison finished with 4 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown on 6 targets, which was only behind Jefferson and Hawkinson, which is clearly expected. Those guys are the studs of this team, so those targets are always going to be going to those guys. Now, it's very comforting that on only 36 snaps that Addison saw in his first game, he put up that kind of production. I would expect as the year goes on, him to solidify himself as the wide receiver 2 on this team, right behind Jefferson, and mostly eat into KJ Osborne's work throughout the year. Heading into week 2, the Vikings are going to have a lot of work to do to avoid going 0-2. They're facing the Philadelphia Eagles. Over-under for this game is set to 48.5, so I expect a lot of points to be scored in this one, and Addison should be able to catch a couple balls once again in week number 2 and going forward, of course. Next up on our list, we have Michael Pittman Jr. Now, I'll be the first one to admit I was a little bit low on Michael Pittman heading into week number 1. He ended up with 23.7 PPR fantasy points, catching 8 passes for 97 yards and a touchdown in this one. What did hold up to be true, what we knew in the preseason, is that Michael Pittman Jr. loves to stay around the line of scrimmage. He caught a screen pass for a 39-yard touchdown, which obviously made up a big chunk of his yardage. That being said, Pittman played 69 of 72 total snaps in this game and was the only player on the team to have double-digit targets, which is very encouraging. Now, Anthony Richardson came out of this game late due to a bruised knee, So it's definitely something to monitor going into the next couple of weeks, especially in week number 2. If he is out and Gardner Minshew is in, then I downgrade Pittman quite a bit in week number 2. But going forward, I want to see that chemistry continue to build between these two. They could be a nice little combo going into the rest of the year here. Number 6, we have Jacoby Myers. Can't say I would have predicted that Jacoby Myers would outscore Davante Adams in his first game as a Raider. That's exactly what he did. He led Las Vegas in receiving yards and targets in week number 1. He outscored Davante Adams with 9 receptions for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns in this one. Do I expect him to be outscoring Davante Adams every single week? Probably not. But do I think Myers could be a solid option on the opposite side of the field from Adams? Yes, I absolutely do. Myers saw 47 out of 59 total snaps on offense and ran the second most routes just behind Davante Adams. Now, heading into week 2, something to monitor is that Jacoby Myers is in concussion protocol, so you have to see what he does. He has to go through a bunch of tests to be able to play in week 2. If he does play in week 2 and beyond even, I like him as a solid flex option. Number 7, we have Travis Etienne. All right, all the preseason and offseason hype paid off in week number 1 against the Colts. Peterson saw him getting way more involved this year, and it showed in game number 1 with 77 yards and a touchdown in this game. Now, some very key takeaways from game number 1 is number 1, Travis Etienne's usage through the air. We said it all offseason. We wanted him more involved in the passing game, and that's exactly what happened. He had 5 catches for 27 yards. He also ran 30 routes, which boosts him into that A tier of running backs in PPR leagues, especially if he continues to see that work. Number 2 is that he outsnapped Tank Bigsby 56-15. So everybody that was talking about them potentially splitting carries in this backfield, that's not going to happen. All right, I don't see that coming anywhere close to happening in the next couple of weeks. Maybe later on in the season he gets a little closer, but I doubt it. Now, even when Bigsby has gotten work in the preseason and in week number 1, he has a problem with fumbling, it seems. So we need to get that under control before he sees any type of relevant work. Number 8, I wanted to throw Rasheed Shaheed on here because he keeps delivering those big plays time and time again. He did it last season. He's doing it again right here in week number 1. 5 catches, 89 yards and a touchdown in week 1. Olave and Thomas are the clear number 1 and 2 wide receivers on this team when they're both healthy. Olave and Thomas played 51 snaps while Rasheed Shaheed played just 35 snaps and outscored Michael Thomas in fantasy. Chris Olave should be that number 1. He should be that year 2 breakout guy that scores the most fantasy points on this team in terms of receivers. But I could see Rasheed Shaheed finishing ahead of Michael Thomas if he continues to deliver on these big plays. We also know that Michael Thomas has a history of injuries, so if he gets hurt at any point in this year, Rasheed Shaheed should be bumped up to that number 2 slot. I would keep him on your bench for now, but definitely keep an eye on this guy, and if he's on your team later on in the season, you need somebody to plug in, Rasheed Shaheed could be the guy to go for you. Now, I want to do just a little bit of an honorable mention for Tua Tagovailoa. Tua had a great game against the Chargers, throwing for 466 yards and 3 touchdowns. The only reason that he's not on this list today is because they have a brutal schedule the next couple of games. They're going to face New England, Denver, and Buffalo, which is way more difficult than playing the Los Angeles Chargers. But I will say he had a fabulous game, and I can't wait to see what they do going forward. If you guys are new to this channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.